Hey guys, today I wanted to talk with you about crop rotation. I get this question all the time, especially on garden tours when maybe you've seen that I haven't rotated all my crops like the experts say you should. So when it comes to crop rotation, should you or shouldn't you? In this video, I'm going to go through the two ways of crop rotation, the traditional way and a more contemporary easier way. At least I think it's easier and much more efficient. And later in the video, I'll let you know what I do so I don't have to be as regimented about rotating my crops in any particular way. Crop rotation is one of the oldest agricultural practices in the book, and it's still practiced today. Crops are rotated because if one crop stays in a certain area for a length of time, so let's say it's here in the same spot for 4 years in a row, that particular crop has its own sets of pests and especially disease that attack maybe that crop more than any other. And so year after year in the same spot, disease, for example, the spores or whatever can stay in the soil or on top of the soil or in the leaf litter that's underneath it. And when you plant the next year, the plants are susceptible to all of those pests and diseases on the ground, which will then multiply that year and multiply more the next year and the next. By moving crops around from place to place, you help to diminish the diseases in the soil that are going to attack that plant while it's moving around to the other places. Another benefit of crop rotation is soil fertility. So there are some plants like legumes that add fertility to the soil, and then there are some that really just take and don't give back. And there are certain types of crops that take certain different nutrients. So in moving those crops around, you create more of a balance in the soil nutrient levels. Planting a bed of peppers this first year, you might get a bumper crop of peppers. And so you think, well, I'm going to plant them right there next year because they liked that spot. The problem is the first year's peppers took all the nutrients that peppers want to take, and now the next crop is an utter failure because it doesn't have those nutrients that they need. So unless you amend your soil every year with compost and fertilizer, the nutrients that that particular plant needs could be completely diminished from the soil. So the traditional way is to rotate your crops based on the type of crop they are, and you have to know that. So to do traditional crop rotation, you have to know the plant families. So let's go through those. The first one is the alliums, and that includes chives, garlic, onions, and shallots. The next group are the nightshades. That's probably the most popular family in the garden. You've got tomatoes, peppers, eggplant, and potatoes. The cucurbit family has over 900 species, things like gourds, melons, summer and winter squash, cucumbers, and zucchini. The legume family contains all of the important nitrogen-fixing plants like alfalfa, beans, cowpeas, clover, hairy vetch, peas, and peanuts. And then there are the brassicas. These are cool season crops that include broccoli, Brussels sprouts, cabbage, cauliflower, collard greens, mustard, kale, kohlrabi, radishes, and turnips. So if you're following the traditional approach to crop rotation, that is 5 families. So you need 5 areas of your garden, one for each family. And you'll have to take into account which family does best following the family that was there the previous year. While traditional crop rotation is no doubt effective, it's been used for who knows how long, it is a little bit tedious and difficult for the average home gardener. Maybe you don't have 5 set spaces in your garden for crop rotation. Many gardeners, including myself, give up after the second year because it's just too difficult to manage. I've found a more effective method that is easier to practice called the 4-step crop rotation. So this allows you to take advantage of all of the benefits of crop rotation without it getting overly complicated. Now, just a note, I go through all of this in detail in my book, Companion Planting for Beginners. I'll leave a link to that down below. But basically, all you need to remember are legume, leaf, fruit, root. So working with just one location, like this raised bed here, we're going to start off year 1 with legumes. Now, legumes are, like I said, either beans, peas, cowpeas, peanuts even. By planting legumes first, You're taking advantage of them being able to fix nitrogen into the soil. Legumes take nitrogen out of the air and hold it in their root systems. Now they use some, but they also leave some after they've died and gone. And they leave that for future plants. So year 2, we're gonna plant leaves in that bed. And that is basically lettuce, greens, herbs, spinach, broccoli, Brussels sprouts, cabbage, cauliflower, collard greens, mustard, kale, or kohlrabi. Now, we're including the brassicas here. Most of these are grown for their leaves. Some of the brassicas are grown for flower, like cauliflower, broccoli, but we're lumping them in here because they need the same requirement, and that requirement is a lot of nitrogen. These are the most nitrogen-hungry plants, so it's only fitting they follow the legumes that left some of their nitrogen in the soil. So that was year 2. Now year 3, we're gonna plant the fruits. So that's tomatoes, peppers, eggplant, squash, melons, gourds, and cucumbers. Fruits come next in the rotation because they don't need as much nitrogen. They need more phosphorus, which last year's group didn't take much of. Now we're at year 4. In year 4, we are going to plant the root crops. These are garlic, onions, radish, turnips, carrots, and beets. And they come last because they need even less nitrogen and phosphorus than the previous occupants of the bed. But they do need a lot of potassium, which the others didn't need a lot of. Now after year 4, we've come full circle and legumes are planted back in the bed. And we start the whole process over again. So just like traditional crop rotation, we are limiting the amount of pests and disease buildup because we're going year to year with a completely different family of plants. And we're also doling out the nutrients by plant family so that you don't plant something in the same location every year that takes the same nutrients or has those same nutrient needs. So the same plant family doesn't return to that bed for 4 years. In my opinion, this is just a much simpler way to remember it in your head and just to keep things organized. Now, do I use either one of those 2 methods? The answer is no, not really. The bottom line is mix things up from year to year. If you want to be technical and do it this way, that's great. You're going to have success that way. If you want to go a little more freestyle, for nutrients, you will need to amend the soil with compost and fertilizer. Talk about that in a second. You also want to keep an eye on things. You want to keep an eye on pests and diseases. I'm going to do another video next week on natural ways to keep disease out of your garden. Things you can plant that actually fight disease of your other plants. So make sure you're subscribed so you get that. Click the notification bell too, so you're notified when that video comes out. Also, you want to do scientifically proven companion planting. Again, I go through that in my book and in certain videos on this channel, things you can plant that keep not only diseases at bay, but pests as well. And then just keep an eye on things. Plant lots of flowers, mix up the planting. You'll see here in certain beds, I don't have one bed full of one crop. I have 3, maybe 4 different crops in one bed that's 4 by 8 feet. Now, the biggest question I get is on my tomatoes, because as you can see way back there, I have my trellises in the same spot to grow my tomatoes on every year. Now I do have 3 spots up there, or will. I have 2 right now. I'm going to be building a 3rd one. Right now I have cucumbers where my tomatoes were last year, and I have tomatoes in the middle one. However, at my last house, I grew tomatoes in the same exact 4 by 8 bed for 5 years in a row. And I never had any pests or disease issues, other than some of the normal ones that crop up, but certainly nothing that was overwhelming that I couldn't take care of easily. So how did I do that? Well, number 1, I fertilize and I amend the soil every year, and so that keeps the nutrients going. However, for pests and diseases, there's 2 things that I do that keep those at bay. Number 1 is the beginning of every season, I put a good 3-inch layer of compost on top of the soil as a mulch once I've planted my crops. And so that puts a physical 3-inch barrier between the disease spores, fungal spores that might be laying on top of the ground. There's a 3-inch layer between those and the leaves of my plants. And I also minimize it because I water with drip irrigation. Drip irrigation puts the water drip by drip right where it needs to be at the root zone of the plants. When you are using overhead sprinklers or you're spraying with a hose, the water bounces off the ground, picks up those spores, and transfers them onto the leaves of the plants where they flourish. I also make sure I have good companions in that bed for whatever crop that I'm growing. Now there is one exception to this rule. If I find a root disease, root knot nematodes, club root, anything affecting the roots themselves, then I will not put that same plant in that spot again for another 2 to 4 years. But again, in another week or so, I'm going to be putting another video out on biofumigation, things that you can plant that will naturally fumigate the soil and help get rid of some of those diseases. I hope this video helped. I know this has been a big question. I get it on almost every video that I do that kind of shows the garden as a whole. So if you learned something, please give the video a thumbs up. Consider subscribing if you haven't already. Share this with a gardening friend, and I'll see you next time.